One thing I can say for sure is that in terms of global communication, media, and so on, the West continues to dominate that field. Nobody really is able to contest CNN, is able to contest the New York Times. Their ability to move an agenda is unbelievable. Partly it's because of control over satellites, it's control over the web. Large parts of the web are basically owned by the West. It has a lot to do with language. Even when Western media is producing things in French, it comes out very quickly in English. On the Chinese side, one of the good things that has happened is China has developed its own social media. Weibo, WeChat, and so on. In terms of the official media houses, the viewership of CNN is much greater than that internationally of, say, CGTN, of RT, and so on. It's very compelling how the West has been able to construct networks, hardware, to dominate the communication landscape. We should look at that. Why is that the case? And then, of course, secondly, the issue of culture and building one's own networks. These have an impact. For instance, Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, to make a comment saying, Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, make a comment saying, the Chinese are expanding in Africa and, it's colonialism. They'll use a term like that, which is completely inappropriate. But that will get repeated not only in the Western media, but in the African media. And that's because of this hold of communication. So I would say one way that one needs to think seriously about what's going on in the world is that there's a communication shortfall. It's interesting. There is this appalling Israeli bombardment of Gaza, and here cracks appear. Western media companies unable to sustain their story that must stand with Israel. Yesterday, I watched Queen Rania of Jordan on Christian Amanpour's show on CNN. And Queen Rania just said, look, it's apartheid. What they're doing is appalling. It's barbaric and so on. The Israeli government should not be defended on this. And CNN had to run it because, well, she's the Queen of Jordan. They couldn't control the story. Things get so bad that you can't control. It's not a question of numbers of people working there, how many satellites you have. It's also the story you need to tell. What is the story that you're telling? Is it a believable story? For years, people said that the Chinese-built port in Hambantota in Sri Lanka is a debt trap port. It trapped Sri Lanka in debt. Well, then two US-based academics, two actually American academics, wrote an article in the Atlantic magazine. They looked at it carefully. They looked at all the evidence and they said, wait a minute, this is not debt trap diplomacy. The Chinese came in and said, look, you have to take the money to build the port in two batches. Take batch one, then build part of the port, make a profit from it. When it's a going concern, take the second. But the Sri Lankan government at the time insisted on taking it all. Its own problem. That's not a Chinese debt trap diplomacy. That was bad judgment on the part of the Sri Lankan government. But that's one article. I reported a story. Bloomberg said that, because of the Chinese loans to build the airport, Entebbe Airport in Uganda, the government was having a hard time paying the loan. China was going to take away Uganda's only international airport. That was Bloomberg's story. So I contacted the Ugandan government. I contacted people in Uganda. I wrote a piece on that. And I showed in the piece, in fact, that's not true. Bloomberg already ran it everywhere. So the story then became China is taking over the airport. This lack of communication democracy in the world makes it very hard for countries like China. It's not just a question of China. It's countries that are trying to do something different. Makes it difficult for them to put on the table what they're doing. Because, the West has a grip on communication. And they can drive any story they want. China taking away an airport, debt trap diplomacy in Sri Lanka, and so on. Even with Belt and Road, it's 10-year anniversary. Haven't seen a sober reflection in any Western press. We are not at a place right now where there is a good communications order in the world, a good international communications order.